you would put in your lesson plan. This is all the learning things, the creative things that you want to think about. How am I going to get my students to learn? What are the experiences I'm going to have them encounter? What are things that they're going to do? What activities, so that they can get the stage 1 stuff. So a lot of times what happens is teachers will get really excited about this activity. Then when you ask them, why are you doing this? There might not be a connection. I don't know. It just was a fun activity I found online and it just engages my students. Which is great, but we want to take things to another notch. All right, we want to know, why are we doing this activity? Why do you have your lesson plans developed the way you do? So are you guys seeing kind of the strategic thinking behind this? Questions on 1, 2, or 3? Carrie?
Do you have a format that you want us to use for the lesson planning? Or
No.
As long as you answer these questions.
Yep,
that's-
if you see them on stage 3, we put about 6 questions that can help you think about, and then you're gonna use that template to fill those in for your unit.
So if there's something that you all have been using in the past and you don't want to stick with that, and it's being totally trying something.
Yeah. If you're a returning teacher, you're like, oh, I've done a lesson that has to do with courage. Oh, it'll fit in here, I'm just gonna use that again. That completely makes sense. The idea is just being systematic and strategic about what we're teaching and how we're teaching the students. Yes?
Normally I use a textbook for my students. Are we still using textbooks this year?
So that's a great question, Joy. This is one of the questions we keep going back and forth in the curriculum meeting. Problem with the textbooks is we don't think they're aligning to the philosophy that we want the school to implement. So what happens is a lot of times, this is what happens in traditional schools, in public schools too. They'll say, oh, here's the math curriculum we're using, and then the teacher will just like be really strict about, oh, I have to cover this book, I have to cover this book, right? And so that's how most schools will run. Like I said, a lot of times, that's not how curriculum experts think it should go. It's not a book. So curriculum experts will tell you should have as many different texts as a teacher that you're using as resources to help implement these stages.
I mean, I do the internet. I mean, I search all kinds of stuff on the internet to supplement, because actually there aren't really enough lessons in the book
Yeah.
to go through the whole year. But I use that as a kind of a guide.
Right, so what we're saying is we're gonna try to use this now as a guide and use the book as a resource. As opposed to being the book dictating what units you're doing, we're gonna try to use these as dictating what we're doing and fit the books in somehow.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so example would be like, if you're covering honesty, you find a chapter in the book that covers honesty and you use that as a resource along with maybe some other books.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the problem with the books, like I said, sometimes it's not agreeing to the philosophy, and then other things is that you might be doing character, and then here these guys are doing like, I don't know, salon. Like, it's not very coherent, but now we're all using kind of the same theme, and then we're fitting the text and support resources we have into those themes.
So that, my last question is, are we supposed to go in order? So can I do love first, or do I have to do honesty?
Oh, no, you don't have to do, but there's the theme.
The
The
unit
character.
itself, so each of the units, everyone would be ideally working on character at the same time.
But you don't have to do them in the order.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Title of the
Honesty,
unit.
respect, kindness.
Yeah.
Title of the unit on top. Title of the unit on
The
top.
unit is character,
So
and
this-
then.
Oh, okay,
Unit.
so I'm looking at the transfer. So
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, so these are the subcategories of this unit,
So, right,
so
so-
these don't matter if you're doing it.
That's my one.
Yeah, we only gave character unit right now to everybody, because that's the first one you'll be teaching.
Right.
And then the other units, will bring them along to you guys.
And Esma, how many Sundays do you think each unit should last?
Yeah, so about 3 to 4,
Okay.
2 to 4, 3 to 5.
or 3 to 5, yeah. I mean, it's gonna be teacher discretion, but 3 Sundays, I can't even imagine anyone doing a unit. So by the time you introduce the unit, that takes a day by itself. So there's gonna have to be a little bit of like, just efficiency. But I don't think it should take more than 5 Sundays, just because again, we're on a Sunday curriculum, Sunday mode.
So any books that Webb has will be given to the specific teachers as a resource. So if we have a second grade book for like We Are Muslims or I Love Islam, we'll pass that over. But the students won't get the books, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was just gonna say, so, do you mind if I, go ahead?
I was just gonna say, Joy, to answer your question, you were using ICRA book last year, right? You'll have that same book. But it's just like what she says, a reference book to draw stuff to fill in this.
Yeah.
And then any copies or anything that you would want to make for your students, from any resources that you have, whether it's that ECRO book, or like I brought up a bunch of books that like I just pulled from my kids' library that, you know, are actually really, so like we were just saying, honesty, for example, like this is a really cool, you know, kids' book that, you know, talks about honesty, but it's like a, you know, thematic type of story type thing, and then you can use that to have a conversation with your kids about it if you want to. You don't have to. And one of the things that Matt and I are hoping to be doing during this next weekend, and one of the things that we want to put back, you know, to all of you as well, is, you know, any resources that you have, that you know about, that you think would be really great ways, like whether it's online or whether it's a book or whatever it may be, you know, please, we want to fill, there's a resources section, so like even under other evidence, maybe in stage 2, or if you know, we can tack on a resources section at the end for this for you all to utilize as well. You know, fill it in so that, you know, inshallah, you have all of those to tap into in future years, or any other teachers that may be coming in as well. So, just jumping in.
Okay. So that's actually what it is. So instead of, again, most schools will give you a text and say, go through this text, and then most teachers will religiously go through the text. We're trying to move away from that philosophy, and this is just actually best practices even in the education world, is that it's about the big pictures, the transfer ideas we want the kids, and it's not about the text, because even texts have their own philosophies coming in. So we're trying to say, no, this is our philosophy, this is what we want, and then you kind of fill in the resources part. So that's the part that's going to probably take you a little bit more time, but hopefully we've done a little bit of the groundwork where we've kind of developed a lot of the, instead of trying to, I don't know how you guys have been getting as teachers, if you've worked here, like, are you given something, but hopefully now you have the content, and it's just a matter of you figuring out what resources and how you're going to implement. So our next slide is, okay, so if we go back to stage 1, and this is the part that I really, you kind of threw me out, and I do apologize, wake up, kind of get back into zone here, is the essential questions and enduring understanding. This is a really crucial part of stage 1. And if you look at your questions, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds again, look at the questions, the essential questions that are written. And I want you to reflect on what those questions in this unit building sound like to you. In the unit, I'm sorry, not on the slide, I apologize. In the unit. Okay, so if you look at your particular grade, you have the whole K7. So if you're in a specific grade or if you don't have any specific grade, I just want you to read those questions to yourself for about 30 seconds. The essential questions are right on the right. These questions.
And each one of them is, like, we try to make it so that it's one page front and back, and you step forward and grading a little older, so you can kind of flip through it on your grade that way. So not here.
I know we're on there on the side, but over here. I know what you know, I do too. Okay, so what are some thoughts on those questions? What do you notice about that? Yes.
This reminds me of a 360-degree evaluation.
Okay.
The way these questions are, just kind of looking at them from a lot of different ways, you know, from the inside and the outside, their perspective, you know, a world perspective, all those types of things.
Okay, so are you finding them like they're good questions, or you
Oh,
find
they're
like,
great questions.
oh my God, there's no way these kids are going to answer it?
Oh, no, I think they would be very good at answering these questions. I'm used to talking to adults all day, so I make a mistake, although I don't think it's such a bad mistake. I talk to my children, my KG first
Yeah,
graders, like they're like, kind of
that's
like I
great.
talk to adults. Probably because the adults I talk to are very immature, but it works out. But no, they're way more, they're more smarter than we think.
Yep. Other thoughts on that question? That's a great point of view, Joy. Yes?
They're very open-ended, so there's lots of different ways.
Okay, so as a product of your schooling, what do you think of open-ended questions? Or your,
I think it means that there's a lot more like room for learning that they can do, and there's a lot of different ways that they can show that they've learned it.
okay, do you find positives or negatives towards that?
That's good, because everybody learns differently and has different answers for things, be right.
Good. Ed?
We're not giving the answers to the students, we're trying to lead them to think of the answer for themselves.
Good. So notice that these aren't black and white questions. These aren't like, you know, who was the first prophet born, or what character, you know, it's a one, those are usually one answer, and on the Bloom's taxonomy, again, in the education world, those are the lowest thinking skills when they're one answer. The higher thinking are questions that are open-ended, and they give the students an ability to think critically. Yes, Terry?
Well, this will help your transfer, because like she was saying, every student is different. When it's open-ended, their answers reflect their life and how it pertains to their life, and it gets more conversation going, and it's a student-led classroom.
Very good. So hopefully you guys are seeing that we're also doing a bit of a philosophy teaching push here, that we want the students to work on answering these questions. You're not answering for them. You are facilitating the conversation. So a lot of times teachers get very nervous with this because there's a lot of let go of like teacher authority. Teacher-centered classroom usually, they create the questions and the students have to answer what the teacher thinks, and then that's it. That really does not leave room for conversations, thought-provoking thinking for the students. And so the idea is we, as the adults, are going to facilitate to go back. Because the question can be like, well, who has the right answer? It's not about the right answer, it's about how do we facilitate that conversation so that the kids will come up with the answer through these questions. So we really need to see these questions in the classroom. So I know we've talked about, you know, having observations, having teachers work together. We want to see these questions being displayed. So if this is the unit you're teaching, you're going to have those questions up for the students. These are not for you. These are for the students. Obviously for you too, because we've had great conversations, Nicolette and I, going through these questions in our own understandings. And so it's also helpful for you. But the idea is that we're going to put these for the students to work with.
I think there's a question.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I just had a comment. It was really similar to Layla's, but basically, like, I think it'll help the students like school more, because I think that they dread it when they think that they won't get something right, or they don't feel like they're smart enough. But this kind of, like, the open-ended questions help them embrace their originality and, like, kind of help them bring their own kind of thing to the table, and then they'll feel good about themselves.
Very good, especially how you respond as a teacher. That's going to be really key. Your response can be like, what did you say? That's so wrong. No, it's kind of, oh, that's interesting. And then you, the teacher, and take that comment and kind of give it back to get that thinking to happen, right? And that's where your role comes in as a facilitator. So look at the things I have on the slide, which are not, this is all the stuff that you just came up with. See, I'm not even telling you what I want you. You guys just did it yourself by looking at those questions. They're inquiry-based. They allow students to self-discovery. They're primary focus of the unit. It takes a complete new shift. So we're no longer fixated on data or like facts. We're now becoming fixated on inquiry and critical thinking and confidence. And that's what we want the students to come out with, that critical thinking. And it's going to happen through different years. So in kindergarten and first grade, character is going to be a very, you know, kindergarten level conversation. And if you look at the 7th grade, it takes a whole nother level. And so the idea is the kids are, they're going through Webb's program, they're going to be developing, they're going to have a different answer in 7th grade. But they're going to see those questions in different formats. And so the idea is they'll develop it for themselves. And that's what creates confident students.
This is going to help with the dual curriculum, the flipping curriculum of the 2 ages in each classroom
Yeah.
as well.
Right.
With it being open-ended, it's not like I'm using this book, then this book.
Yes, that's exactly true. So those questions aren't only for that one book. They're like, these are questions that can go in either grade.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in, actually, that just made me remember. So because you have the same group, theory for 2 years, you may choose to split this in half, like in terms of the topics that you're covering. So for example, you're doing the character unit and looking at Cajun versus at the front. Maybe the first year, you're focusing on honesty, respect, kindness, and fairness, and the next year, you're focusing on caring, generosity, and love. So you can choose to do that, or you can choose to cover all of them, combine some of the character traits together, and then, but focus less time or more time, whichever year you want, on whichever topics you want. So this unit is going to span the 2 years that you're teaching that group of students. So that helps a little bit as well. Right.
Okay, so the next part is enduring understanding. It's goes hand in hand. It's the other box. I'm not going to have you read them. They're just a statement of what we want, because part of curriculum is to also help you as what are the answers you kind of want to make sure that the students have. And the statements there are kind of helping you lead to the answers you want the students to come up with. So that's what enduring understanding. They're the big ideas, again, they're important concepts, they reflect what the unit is. So if you read them, they go hand in hand with the questions to help you figure out like where do I want this conversation to go to. So that's the big part of stage 1. Questions on stage 1, because that's the most important one, and we're spending a little bit of time on it because it really is the one that you want to be comfortable with implementation. Yep.
I don't know if you already touched on this, so I'm sorry if you did, but, do you think it would be helpful at the beginning to give, or kind of write the questions on the board or something, so at the beginning to start with that thinking, like, oh, at the end, I need to know the answers to these.
Yep, I need to have had discovery because my assessment, when you're going to test them, they're going to have to answer those questions in their test.
Even with like KG and stuff?
Yep, even KG. KG, I think there's like come up with a poem that reflects these different, so we've tried to make the assessment appropriate. But no, that's exactly, you have it on the board, you have it on a poster. These questions are not hidden. These questions we are wanting the kids to see. We want the students to talk about it, think about it, go home and say, oh, you know, Miss whatever, Mr. whatever asked this great question today. What do you think, Mom? What do you think? And it really, they're great conversations to connect at home. Because then the adults are going to start talking in this way. And so it's no longer, well, no, this is what I think, this is what you have to think. But there's nothing wrong with that, but we just want a balance of that conversation that the kids are also developing their own thoughts.
It might even be kind of cool, actually, it's just thinking for asking them to send it home with the kids in some capacity and have parents read it and then have it be an ongoing conversation that way as well. If the kids aren't as willing to talk, maybe the parents will bring it up or something.
Because our kids always go home and talk about what they learned in Sunday school, right?
Mine do it all the time, right?
But this is also something that parents will have, right? They have access to, I should say. So if they ever want to have a discussion with their kids about what they learned in Sunday school, they can start it based on this. You know, what are the things?
I don't know, I mean, we haven't talked about this, but that's fine.
That's one of our goals. So we'll be like one of the first Sunday schools that actually have a curriculum book that parents have access to find out what exactly are we covering from month to month. Inshallah.
Yeah. I don't know, do you think we should go into it more?
I mean, does anyone have any questions? I know you had a chance to look at it a little bit. Do you have questions about how the essential question maybe would be enduring understanding?
So this is just an example. I took these questions right from the packet. You have one.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to go into more detail, but I think I've already done that. But if you have any questions on that stage 1 right now of essential questions and enduring understandings, please go ahead and ask, because that's the part that we really want us to work with.
So what we did is we just, pulled an example for each grade.
Yep. The teens?
Yes.
No, we were only doing up to 7.
Okay, so it's purposely up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The teens, I think.
That's up to you and me, Mona. You and I, we gotta do it.
That's what we're doing. Great.
Sorry.
And then next week,
That was gonna be our essential question for you.
You have to tell that now, Mona.
I think, right, we were just,
No, no,
we're not even done. I mean, this is really taking us a lot of time.
I can totally.
But if you look at, KG, sorry, can you go back to, I just would, hopefully you guys can just look at the questions of how we try to really scaffold them to the upper grades. Like the kindergartens are just asking like, why is it important to be honest? A lot of kids will say why, or little kids, honesty is something they can really get because they're so black and white and innocent. Like, she liked me, he liked me. Like you hear that a lot from elementary kids, kindergarten. And we tried, and then if you look at the understanding that in order to trust each other, people have to be honest. Like again, 5-year-old kids can get that, 4-year-old kids can get that. As we developed it through, the next one was trust, where now 2nd, 3rd graders start to understand, society, the people around. 2nd graders do get that, 1st graders don't. They're still very centered in their own little KG world. They don't have an appreciation of a community or society. And now it's talking about trustworthiness in people and communities, how that's important. And then we flip into neglect, the fourth and fifth, where the questions become more complex, talking about patience, which kindergartners really don't, you can talk about patience, but don't have the grasp of it as a fourth and fifth grader does. And then finally, accountability, which is a really deep topic that even as adults, we're still trying to grasp with what does it mean to be accountable for behavior. And so it takes that kind of complexity as we move on with it.
And like I said, what's really cool about it is that you really can tie these into the following. It's like as you're talking about accountability, I'm thinking about what we were talking about with Aqida, and like once you get down to that spirituality one, and you know, and one of the really big things that we talked about with sixth and seventh grade was not only accountability to yourself, but accountability towards Allah, and how do you hold yourself accountable for your actions, you know, and how that relates and connects with you and Allah and the broader community and all of that stuff. So it's really, hopefully, inshallah, you'll see some sort of linear progression that allows you to have some really deep and important conversations with your kids.
Yep. All right, should we move?
Yep. Okay, so I'll try to go quickly through the stage 2 stuff. So if you guys take a look over at kind of what we're doing here, this is essentially, so this is your assessment, right? This is what you're looking at as your lesson planning, and how you're going to make sure that your students are understanding what it is that's happening. So some of the questions that we're asking here, you know, how will you know if your students have achieved the desired results? You know, when you can read through some of the others. But one of the really big things that I think of when I'm thinking about assessment and developing something that I want to make sure my students are understanding throughout is that it starts at the beginning and it continues throughout the entire time I'm teaching whatever it is I'm teaching, and then at the end you're kind of narrowing in and trying to figure everything out that you present, right? So, so actually, to be honest, I think I'm just gonna
Sorry,
move on to the next. No, it's okay. I'm just gonna move on to the next slide.
Yeah.
Because I think it's easier to talk about that through examples. So these are just some examples of ways that you can assess or provide evidence for understanding or gather evidence for understanding from your students. So maybe, you know, you talk about something, you read a story, or, you know, you go through a hadith or whatever it is that you choose that you're going to be teaching that day. And then you want to make sure that you want to, that the kids understood what it was that you were talking about. We have some other examples later on that are more, you know, small scale that you can do. So I'm going to talk about a KWL right now. Actually.
Yeah, sure.
But like one of the strategies, any of you have come across as educators or just in general in your studies, is called a KWL, and it stands for what do you know, what do you want to know, and what do you want to learn. And it's a really great tool to use with your students. I wish I had something to kind of write it out, but what you do is you kind of put this table, you draw a table on the board, and the first column is what do you know. So let's say you're talking about honesty. What do you know about honesty? What can you tell us about how that manifests, you know, how it plays out in your life? Give me some examples about, you know, how you've been honest or how other people have been honest. What do you want to learn about honesty? And maybe that's not the best example for you to use for it, but like, you know, maybe you're talking about a sahabi or you're talking about a prophet or something like that. You can extrapolate it out and gives you an idea of what your starting point is, where all your students are, what is it that they're curious about that individual or about that topic, and then you ask them what they want to learn. And so those are things that you can address throughout your teaching and then make sure that you're touching on those topics. So it's a really great assessment tool or evidence for understanding tool that you could start off with and then continue, you know, to build around. So I won't walk you through all of this, but you know, essentially the main thing that we wanted to put out there is that there's a lot of traditional things that come to mind when you think about assessment. You think about just a test, multiple choice test, fill in the blank, you get a sheet of paper, you give it to them, everyone's quiet, and they're kind of just writing down the answers. And the goal is, inshallah, through this curriculum, hopefully, that it's a much more engaging, much more interactive experience, which it sounds like a lot of you guys are already doing, you know, anyway. So hopefully it's an easy transition, but you can have the kids, you can do a role play, act out, have a debate, you know, have a conversation, give them something to read at the older grades, and then have them talk about it with each other afterwards, and really start to process and tie it back to those essential questions that Asma was talking about initially. So any questions about what this part is? Yes.
What's the Hall of Recognition?
That actually was Asma's idea, so I'm not.
So Hall of Recognition is recognizing people. So if you're looking, our unit 2 is like role models and characters. It kind of goes the same with create with museum display, but museum display doesn't have to be a person. Hall of Recognition would be a person that we want to, so let's say that unit 2 is about role models and prophets. Now I know we don't draw prophets and there's, you know, controversy about do we draw them or not, but it could be just their story. It could be a drawing illustrated from their story, so it would be a hall of recognizing like Prophet Musa, Prophet Abraham, Aisha, and you have a hall of recognizing these individuals, and so that would be your assessment for that unit, is that I want you guys to work as groups, you know, from everything we've talked about for this unit, we're going to build a hall of recognition of certain individuals that we discussed, and they have to create something. So that's a great way to assess them, right? Because you're going to see if they're answering the questions of why it's important to have role models. The essential questions for that unit is why do we need role models? How do they help us become better? The big questions. So when they're drawing, you're going to see what are they really pointing at? Are they pointing at the mini facts of those people, or are they trying to point at big concepts in their pictures? That's a great question. That's a hall of recognition. The museum is also a really great one to do as an assessment. These, again, if you see, they're very engaging. They're very hands-on. They do take time, but they allow to have the kids enjoy the engagement part. And they allow them to allow you to see what they learned and what they didn't.
And you can actually also, one of the really great things about this ongoing assessment approach is that you don't it allows you to kind of build around that student-centered classroom where you don't necessarily have to have taught every detail or every fact that you want to present, but give them a chance to kind of build that into it, or you build it into it as they're presenting and they're talking through whatever it is that they're doing through the activity itself. So I wanted to give an example, so because I know this is part of stage 2. So if you take a look at your units in particular, again the ones that we had given you, the stage 2 evidence for understanding component. So that's where all of these come in. So at the kindergarten one, for character, for example, it was they're going to write or draw a picture, right? Because you've got kindergartners who maybe can't write yet, but first graders who are a little more adept at that. Some sort of acrostic poem, choosing one of the characteristics that they studied, describing themselves. So they write the letters of their name, from top to bottom, and then for each letter, some sort of character trait example that they feel they can highlight in themselves or by drawing a picture. That's one way of doing it. At the higher levels, you can see for the 6th grade and 7th grade, one of the things that I personally think is really, really nice to do is to find ways to bring in all the different types of learners. So like as I was saying, we're doing taxonomy, and then also there's just, kids learn in different ways. Some of them are more visual, some of them are more instructional, some of them like to draw, some of them, whatever it is. So I was suggesting for this one, and like as Matt said, you're not tied to this in any way, shape, or form. But some sort of either a skit or a short story or a public service announcement, something that they can work in a small group together, and just highlight 2 character traits that stood out to them through that specific activity. And so it gives them a chance to express themselves, to have some fun with it, perform it in front of your class or in front of you, and then at the same time, you can make sure that they've kind of processed what it means and how those character traits apply to them in their own lives. Any questions about any of this stuff? So stage 3, Esmat was going to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so we've been talking for an hour right now, and I'm getting to that point where we're like, oh my god, or like looking at my phone. She's so boring. We can move on. I have things to do. I have a life. I know. We know. So we're gonna move on. So this is the part where we're actually gonna have you work just to give you that prep time, so that you're not panicking Saturday night and like, oh my god, I have to be in Sunday school tomorrow. I have class. I have to teach them. I don't know what to do. So we're gonna do that a little bit right now. And that's stage 3, which we said we did not do. We were only working on 1 and 2. 3 is where you come in. So if you go ahead and open your unit right now, the one you're going to be teaching, whatever grade you're at, and look at stage this is the lesson plan part. And that's not filled out, so we're gonna walk around right now and you can work within the people around you, get some ideas. What are you gonna do to plan for that unit? What lesson plans are you gonna take in for that unit? And so, the things you wanna think about, the knowledge and skills also were in stage 1, developed out for you. You wanna kind of use those as support to help you think of ideas of, okay, what activities or what kind of things can I do to help use that knowledge and skills in stage 1. And so those are things you're going to use to help develop out your lesson plan. What do you need? What are the materials? So this is the nitty-gritty of like Sunday, session 1. What do I need? What am I going to do? What am I going to talk about? How am I going to bring this up, right? But I have my essential questions. I know what I need to say. How am I going to now, what activities, what resources do I need to be able to get through this first lesson? So in the next slide, we have some ideas of, there's tons of ideas out there. You can talk to each other. These are by no means an endless. There's so much out there, it's not even plenty of like instructional strategies. Like that, I already talked about KWL. Others that you see here are focusing on key vocabulary, which is part of the knowledge. So if you feel like the kids don't know some of these words, you might want to figure out how am I going to explain these words to them. A hook, it's kind of like how do I get them engaged with my conversation? All right, so, you know, what others like, oh, have you ever heard about this great person that, or I'm going to give you guys a scenario. What would you do if, so that's kind of like it starts to get them engaged, right? So being animated and engaged, what's the hook? Direct instruction, Socratic seminars are really great tools with middle school, high school. Those are kind of exactly what they sound like. You do a seminar, they read the same thing, you have questions that facilitate to get the answers and dialogue between them within a seminar way. Scenarios are really also good. Like I said, you might want to start with what would you do if this happened. Reciprocal teaching is a strategy where you have the students kind of taking a role of teaching. You kind of reciprocate. You become the student, they become the teacher, and they kind of, how would you teach this? How would you explain it? And then graphic organizers. I mean, there's just so much. I'm not even really giving the due of instruction strategies, but we wanted you guys to go ahead and start working on that, and then we'll just walk around and answer any of your questions on what you would like to do in terms of stage 3. Okay, so let's have about 15 minutes.